writer, and many things. But in short, we've called him just art critic for lucidity. Sadanand Menon will speak on Dashrath Patel for JDCA's 246th Meet the Artist program. This session that we're doing is naturally being seen on Zoom, but it's also available on YouTube for those who can't join into Zoom. JDCA is envisioned as a unique art center that aims to preserve and exhibit its large collection of folk, tribal, traditional, and contemporary art, all under one roof. It is currently under construction in Bhubaneswar, Orissa, opposite the 2nd century Khandagiri caves. Meet the Artist is a program which is in-house at the JDCA, where artists, craftspersons, or scholars, through their illustrated presentations, create an appreciation of all forms of visual art. Since 2001, 245 such Meet the Artists have taken place on every 2nd Saturday of every month. Currently, our sessions are being held online. And before I go forward and say more about this, I will request my father and chairman, the founder chairman of JD Center of Art.
Namaskar. It's been a long journey. It's an indulgence for an artist to do an institution. Very few artists have done it. And I regret it now because I put the load on others as well as on my children. Because I'm now 80 years old. We started the art center, the JD Center of Art, in 1967. And when we were registering the court, the judge said, no, some people said it'll take 2 months. And I requested the judge, can you do it today? As I have to go to Delhi tomorrow. So he called all the people and did the job in 1 day. And he asked me immediately what will be the name of the center. And I fumbled, and then I said, call it JD Center of Art. So anyway, that's a long way. Meet the Artist program is one of the programs. We have a National Documentary Film Festival on Art, which started in 2006. And Meet the Artist program went on uninterrupted for 20 years, every 2nd Saturday of the month at 6 o'clock in Bhubaneswar at the rented place that the government has provided. And we meet folk, tribal, classical, contemporary artists, scholars, critics, historians on the same platform. So as Siddharth said, that couldn't continue because of the epidemic. And during this online program, we had V.V. Doshi, the great architect, Raghurai, the great photographer, Garanaik, the Director General of National Gallery and whatnot, and a few others. Jasleen Dhamija, the great textile and handloom person. Raghurai, as I said, the photographer. So we have had this. And we're very delighted that Sadanand is here. And but before we go ahead, I would like to reminisce, not condole, that many of our artists and architects and thinkers and philosophers passed away within 1 year. And so we pay not only respect, but we also recollect their wonderful work they have done. So this is one. And then talking of Dashrath, Dashrath Patel is a friend of mine. I met him in 1959. When I, as a student in Sir J.J. School of Art, had the studio at the Bhulabhai Memorial Institute at Warden Road, which is now known as Bhulabhai Desai Road. And Dashrath and Gaitonde had it on the 1st floor. And I had my studio, me and Hussein and Prafulla Joshi had it on the mezzanine floor. So I know Dashrath from those days. Although he was much older than me, we are very good friends. And I remember Madhuri Ben Desai is the person who introduced Dashrath. Madhuri Ben Desai was the owner, and Solibhai Batliwala. They are the two people who ran that Pullabai Memorial Institute, which was a wonderful institution. It's not a teaching institution. Every creative person had a studio there. Ravi Shankar, Hussain, Prafulla Joshi, Gaitonde, Dashrath Patel, Madhav Satwalekar, etc. And even the yoga teacher, Mr. Iyengar. So having known him from those days, and then there was a long gap, I didn't meet him. And I had gone to Alibag to see his museum. And as and when, because I came over to Delhi, and as and when I met him in Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Delhi, we met up with our old camaraderie. So the last time I met him was that he insisted that he wanted my catalog. He was not well. He was in the car. I was staying with B.V. Doshi. He came with me to take my catalogs. And this was some years ago. So, and I remember his abstract work, having seen his museum and his retrospective exhibition. And also, Chandralekha was a very old friend of ours, and she lived in Worli. And she went, and so Dashrath, Chandralekha, and Menon, these three were in Chennai, in Madras. And beautiful congregation of wonderful minds. So the takeoff point for Dashrath is Pullabai Institute. And I'd like to request Sadanand Menon and Siddharth will lead the discussion. But very sad, Dashrath is not in there, a big-eyed, tall, handsome fellow. And he will comment about anything, anywhere in a meeting, what he feels. And we were like that in our earlier times, with no, without mincing words. We always had direct dialogue. Now, please take over.
Yeah. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Dashrath and Sadanand before we go on. Dashrath Patel's work was across disciplines: art, sculpture, ceramics, photography, architecture, and design. He's often described as a visual genius for his prolific intensity and depth of work spanning 6 decades. Born in 1927, Dashrath was the first Secretary of Education at NID. We don't exactly know the title. I was corrected by Ashok Chatterjee earlier yesterday, so I stand corrected. I believe that possibly the titles were very amorphous at that time, but he was there right from the time it started, picked up by the Sarabhais, Diraben and Gautam Bhai, to head and to be at the helm of education at NID. He was there till 1980 and virtually represented every international exhibition, trade fair, and festival that India participated in. In 1998, the National Gallery of Modern Art, New Delhi, had a major retrospective exhibition of 50 years of Dashrath's work in painting, photography, design, and ceramic, titled In the Realm of the Visual. The show was curated by Sadanand Menon and also traveled to NGMA Mumbai in 1999. Dashrath was honored with many awards, including the first ever Padma Shri for design and design education in 1981. He passed away in 2010 and was posthumously conferred the Padma Bhushan in 2011. A little about Sadanand, who's going to present. And it's the first time we have a distinguished person talking about a distinguished person. So I think it's very exciting. We've never had someone talking about someone else. We've only had once when there was a dialogue between Ramchandran, the artist, and Shivakumar, Professor Shivakumar. And for us, this is the first in the many times as it's happened. Sadanand Menon is a well-known arts editor, columnist, photographer, arts curator, and stage lights designer. He's had the distinctive profile of linking the media, the academy, and the arts. He's been an advisor to the National Museum, Lalit Kala Academy, and the National School of Drama in Delhi, National Gallery of Modern Art in Bangalore, and the India Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla, among others. He's a trustee of the Raza Foundation, Delhi, of Dakshina Chitra near Chennai, and is the managing trustee of Spaces in Chennai, and on the editorial advisory board of the Marg magazine, Mumbai. He has taught and lectured at various universities, colleges across India. A long-time collaborator with legendary dancer choreographer Chandralekha, he has been deeply involved with issues pertaining to contemporary Indian dance. He has curated landmark retrospectives of senior artists like Dashrath Patel, Balan Nambiar in Bangalore, S.G. Vasudev in Bangalore and Mumbai. Over to you, Sadanand and Miti. Thank you.
Miti, please start with.
Right from the beginning, I decided that I don't want to study. I don't want to go to school. It takes a long time to convince my parents because I was coming from a very well-to-do family at that time with the business and everything. And my mother and father, everybody saying that if you don't study, what will happen? And second thing, I love nature and playing. Then I studied, and it doesn't matter difference to me. So I decided not to do that. And then therefore till I became 15 or 16 to travel, I had to be somewhere to anchor my ship rather than wandering in the street. So I decided to stay in one class. And I was almost blooming for first class cricket. And so I thought, my coach was, if I tell you, very difficult to say, but my coach was Vinu Mankad and Hazare and all, they were my coach. They were the kids. Yeah, they were employed as a teacher. They employed people as a teacher.
So you love playing cricket?
Oh, wonderful. I used to play for South Zone. I played for trophies and given up one time when I realized that it lasts only 5 years of your career. So I decided to be an artist. I knew a lot about by prints. I'd never seen an original. And when I look at the print, the printing quality or whatever it is, they look like they're very heavily thick paints. And just the fantasy of doing that, I started using knife, which lavishly using so much paint and work on it. When I've been to France in 1953, first time, I realized that what I thought of it, thick layer, they were only brush strokes and not the paint itself so thick. So that makes me in another area. When you see that this work, you can't say it derives from the French. But I understood my own way Impressionism. Like I used to when I was very young, I have nothing else I can do. So I made up my bicycle where I can put 20 papers, all the colors I require, all that required food. And I used to go like vendors. What vendor does? He goes street to street, meeting house to house, trying for selling everything till he sells, he doesn't comes out, no home. So I used to do like that as a vendor, like go with my papers and everything, and still I finish my all papers and colors, I don't come home. Good design it can be hard for the cost reduction. And I've been hired several times for cost reduction. You know, there's a wayside restaurant in India. They put 4 finger in it and put 4 glass top on the dhaba and all. And everybody thinks, so they said we wanted to design top for not people hold it 4 cups together. And Olympic has commissioned me when I was in NID. And I designed these 4 cups, you can't hold it together. If you hold it, it slips out. Because the contour, they don't have support that, so they bend like this. So it slips out from your hand. Like if you try to hold 4 to water, they fight with each other and it slips out. So this I designed very successful the purse, but then what happens wrong is immediately Olympic realized that a good form, good thing, why should we sell it for 8 annas? Original price was 8 to 12 annas a glass for a wayside restaurant. And suddenly everybody thought about you can have a good beer mug and it's a very good, elegant enough. The purpose was defeated because profit making. Good design. Design is not free from relating to the life or the style. If you don't relate it, there's no design. Like if you make a teapot, you have to know that when you pour the tea, the drop should not be drips out because you spoil the tablecloth or the saucer or the rocker. That you have to have control when you design it, that it drips not out, but it sucks back. It's not one-time use. It's based on economy, affordability. It's a quality of product finish. When you make a beautiful teapot, you have to know that no dust can remain in the teapot when you clean it. It should be easily to be cleanable. But if I style the teapot, I don't have to require it. Then I can style a form. Most of the people do when they do the pot, they make the teapot look different. You are not doing for different. You are enhancing the function.
Okay, welcome everybody. And I don't know how many of you, for you, the projection was clear, the voice was clear. There's a bit of a jump in it, but then that's about all one can do in this medium. The clips you saw, I wanted to begin with Dashrath's voice. After all, we are discussing Dashrath Patel, and I guess most of you who are on this program at the moment are familiar with him and familiar with his work in some way or the other. You have heard of him in some context or the other. But it was important for me that we begin with his voice and not my voice, because we are talking about an artist who has been gone now for over 10 years and has left behind a very rich legacy of not just his own work, but of a large number of students and admirers who have taken after him and so on. So the clips that you saw from a 54-minute long documentary film that has been made on the 1998 retrospective of his work that was shown first at the NGMA in Delhi and the next year in 1999 at the NGMA in Bombay. And the film is made by a well-known documentary filmmaker based in New Delhi called Ifat Fatima. And it provides you a particular narrative. If you see the whole film, I think it's on YouTube, if you see it. It gives you a particular narrative. So there are many people who can speak about Dashrath. There are many voices that can come in to tell you about Dashrath and who he was and how he was. And each narrative will be a different narrative because he was many things to many people. And I can think, for example, of his sister, Snehalata Desai, who lives in Ahmedabad, who can provide us a very interesting narrative. He had two sisters, both of whom are not into art. Snehalata was into medicine, she was a doctor, and the other sister, the other sister was into law, and they were nowhere near the arts. So it's only after Dashrath passed away that, in fact, Snehalata even got to know his artwork from a little close. But there is a particular narrative she provides, which is very interesting. Then there is a very interesting set of students, former students in Ahmedabad, who today have constituted a group called Friends of Dashrath. So people like Paulo Shah and Archana Shah and Sangeeta Shroff and this group, Pinky Gudiawala and Jayashree Podar in Bangalore, etc., who are his former students, but who interacted with him very closely, who understood his work very closely and can provide us a very interesting insight. Instead of me, if any one of you was here presenting Dashrath, you would have had a completely different insight probably. And so too, when a couple of years ago, the NID was, for the first time ever, looking back at itself. That's one of the biggest drawbacks of NID, which I'll come to a little later, but it for the first time indulged in this act of looking back at its own history and looked at 50 years of the formation of the ceramic studio in NID, which was set up by Dashrath and launched by him. And one of his first students there was Christine Michael, who lives in Delhi and is currently very well known as an artist curator as well as a teacher of art in the British School. And she had made a fantastic presentation for that occasion about Dashrath and his ceramic work. So that could have been a wonderful entry point for an audience like this. Or you have Gira Sarabhai, who founded, one of the founders along with Gautam Sarabhai of the NID, who is still there in Ahmedabad at 97 and has a fantastic take on Dashrath and his contribution, and the sheer admiration for this 8th standard dropout. That's what Dashrath Patel was. He was a dropout from 8th standard, and he went into art, and he had a certain problem with verbal articulation. He wasn't particularly comfortable with words, but when it came to hands, it was magic with fingers and magic with conceptualization and imagination, and with material. You could give him any material and he could convert that into some sort of a beautiful object. And so Gira could have given us a very interesting perspective on this. If you take a historian like Professor B.M. Goswami, who is in Chandigarh and was along with Dashrath working very closely with the Sarabhai Foundation in Ahmedabad. Professor Goswami had long extended chats with Dashrath and was a great admirer, and some of his interviews with Dashrath have also been published. So he could have given us a absolutely different take, a very interesting entry point into Dashrath and his work. Or you have Professor A.G. Krishna Menon, I just saw him join in, who again worked with Dashrath on many projects and worked fairly closely over many years on many different things, and has even given talks on Dashrath and his work and written about it. So he could have given us a very interesting, insight into Dashrath and his work. Or you have the art writer and curator based in Mumbai, Nancy Arjania, who has been a long time researcher into this whole multimedia entry into Indian art, and has been looking at Dashrath's work and following it very closely, and has also written some very interesting pieces on Dashrath and has made some very interesting presentations on his work at the Serendipity event in Goa and so on. So that could have been a amazing entry point here. Or there are people like Shanae Jhaveri and Nada Raza, who are also curators, international curators, who have, or even Natasha Jinwala, who's based in Colombo and a very interesting curator in her own right. But Shanae and Nada were actually recruited by the Tate Modern to research on Dashrath for a possible exhibition on his work, which could have happened about 2 or 3 years ago, but then the whole project, I think, was scattered. So there are many people who have been engaging with his work and trying to find out how to, put it all together. And when it comes to a more, let's say, journalistic or a popular narrative, as it's called, my own colleagues who were with me in the Economic Times when I was editing the arts pages of the Economic Times, people like Chitra Padmanabhan, Aarti Jaiman, Namrata Joshi, Amit Sen Gupta, who had very close interactions with Dashrath because he was our consultant for a design page that we had started in the Economic Times, 1993-94. For the first time ever in the Indian mainstream media, the Economic Times had a full page dedicated to design every week. And it produced some very interesting material, including some superb sort of thoughts on design and the design problematic from Dashrath, from Kumar Vyas, and various people like that. And I think these people would have provided a very interesting narrative to understanding Dashrath. Or there is a Chennai-based scholar called Geeta Jairaj who's written quite a few. She never met Dashrath, but she's written 2 or 3 articles on him, which are very insightful and could have given us a perspective. So, and as Jatinder just now said, he himself, if he started reflecting on the Bhulabhai Desai Center and the experience of that, and what it meant, and the number of artists who came and went, and the fantastic frisson and the interaction that happened between them, you would have had a very special narrative there. So basically what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to sort of say, I wanted to say it succinctly, but it's become quite big, is that there are narratives about Dashrath which are quite capacious and quite varied and quite interesting, which come from different directions. And I just happen to be a pluribus unum, one among the many who can say a few things about him. And it just happened completely coincidentally in one way, because Dashrath was extremely close to the dancer choreographer Chandralekha. Right from the beginning, both of them were students. Dashrath of painting and sculpture at the College of Art in Madras under Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary, and Chandra, who had come to Chennai to Madras of that time from Bombay to study Bharatanatyam from Kanchipuram Guru Yellappa Pillai. So, and they both happened to meet and lived together with Haridhanath Chattopadhyay, this great scholar and artist and singer and musician and politician, all rolled into one. And were tremendously inspired by Haridhanath Chattopadhyay. They used to call him Baba. So Baba's, ideas and his vivacity and his absolute passion for life and his commitment to causes and so on. And it was very formative for these two young people to be. Anyway, so Chandra and Dashrath were together on many things. Around the time when Dashrath was joining NID in 1961, Chandra was giving up a very illustrious career in classical Bharatanatyam in Chennai and was moving into other areas, which included writing and designing and so on and so forth. And she became like a natural ally for some of the projects that were happening in NID, including the Gandhi Centenary exhibition, for which Dashrath had designed a fantastic tensile structure pavilion at the Rajghat in Delhi and outside the Rajghat. And Chandra did the concept and the text for that entire exhibition. So there were a lot of collaborations like that. For Time magazine, they did a series on the drought in Rajasthan and so on and so forth. So this collaboration was continuing, and even though they were traveling all over the world and they were not necessarily living together, etc. And when I started working with Chandra somewhere around 1975-76, that was the first time I'm meeting Dashrath. And by 79, Dashrath is pulling out of the NID kind of experience. By 1980, he had resigned. And ironically, by 1981, he gets a Padma Shri, the first Indian Padma Shri for design education in India. So now, if you noticed carefully in the opening clips, the roughly 4-minute long clips that I showed, one segment is the Dashrath talking about his work as an artist, as a painter, as a, someone he even describes this in a very curious way, as a, carrying paper and colors on a bicycle, like a vegetable vendor carries his vegetables, and by the time he circles around and sells all his wares, and only then goes back home. Similarly, he took his papers and colors and spent the whole day wherever his fancy took him, and until he finished the paper and color, he didn't come back home. So this was his basic early training when he was studying in CN school in Ahmedabad. I'll come to that a little later, but the reason so one segment in that clip was about his identity as a painter, and the second segment he talks about design and his identity as a designer. And interestingly, in his career, this has been a clash. Had he continued with his solo identity as an artist and a sculptor, I think by now you would have had a completely different profile of the man, in the sense he would have been recognized, he would have been celebrated, he would have been fitted, there would have been all sorts of things in his name and so on. And he kept the company of some of the best at that time, people like Hussain and Tayyib Mehta and Akbar Padamsi and people like Prafulla and so on and so forth. So Raza, they were all together in this Bhulabhai Desai Center. And whenever Dashrath had exhibitions in Bombay, the person who used to do his reviews for him, reviews of his exhibition, both of his painting exhibitions and his ceramic exhibitions, was none other than Al-Qazi, who was also part of the Bhulabhai Desai Center. Al-Qazi used to write under a pen name, and in this film by Fatima, you see the whole film, Al-Qazi talks about the experience. So the surprise he got every time he saw Dashrath's work, either his paintings or his ceramic, it was like a revelation. They all used to wonder, how did he do this, etc., etc. So the point I'm trying to make is, had he continued simply as a painter, he would have been put on a certain kind of pedestal. But around 1961, when he deviated from painting and went into, I'm saying deviated, for him, in his mind, there was no deviation. For him, it was a continuity. But when he slipped into design work, there was a certain mental trick that happened with people around, people who were observing the art world, that Dashrath has stepped down. Design is in a lower rung in the hierarchy than painting. And even lower is craft. That is the Indian art world. We have hierarchies. It's a caste system, which we need to acknowledge it, that we are in that kind of caste system. And the painter and sometimes the sculptor is right on top. Then there's a whole system of hierarchies that comes below, and probably the person who works with textile and leather comes right at the bottom, even though some absolutely glorious things are produced by people who work with this material. So when he stepped into the world of design and for the next roughly 20 years, vanished from the within quotation art scene, the high art scene, he was very visible in the design scene. He was one of India's prominent designers. He was creating something like 50, 70 to 100 objects a year for an ID. He was curating and presenting some of the most discussed exhibitions for India in international exhibitions and trade fairs and pavilions and so on. He was collaborating with some of the finest names known in the international art world, from Charles and Reims on one side to architects like Louis Kahn and Bucky Fuller and Fry Otto and so on. He was working with multimedia experts like Yaroslav Frick or Ivan Shermaev. He was working with sound magicians like John Cage and David Choder. He was really expanding out. He was like a person who had been in the Upanishads. We hear of this character called Nachiketa, and Nachiketa is asked, "So who is your teacher?" And he says, "Everybody is my teacher. The stone is my teacher. The bird is my teacher. This is my teacher. That is my teacher." And that's what Dashrath was. He learned from everybody, and he learned from all sorts of different sources: Cartier-Bresson, photography; Herbert Matter, photography, etc., etc. So he was amplifying his skills, amplifying his mind, amplifying his creativity. But in the art world in India, which was still a bit narrow at that time, today everybody talks of multimedia, but at that time, it was like he has gone a rung low. He's no longer an artist. So there was a certain excommunication from the art world, as it were. And it's always been a surprise to me that art writers, art critics, art historians show some tremendous hesitancy to engage with the work of people like Dashrath. And I'm saying people like Dashrath. It's not only Dashrath, there are many people like him. And I have for quite some time been writing that this is a black hole in Indian art history. The inability to recognize the contribution and the wonderful sidestepping that many of these artists made and went into very specialized areas and contributed back to art. So for me, this is a very ironic moment where, on the one hand, Dashrath is beginning as an artist and is recognized as an artist and is communing with the best of the artists in the country. And within a few months or few years, a presto like that, he vanishes from the art scene, becomes so-called invisible to the art world because he's gone into design, and yet flourishes as a designer in his own right. And even after he left NID in 1980, he continued to flourish as a designer. He designed exhibitions, he designed big exhibitions, festivals of India, inaugurals, and various things like that. And till the end, I think before he passed away, he was very busy working with a new range of jewelry design, which he had been commissioned for the Wimbledon by a set of jewelry makers in New York, and so on and so forth. So this is a very split moment that happened in Dashrath's career. In his own mind and body, I don't think there was a split. But for when you look at it from outside, there was a kind of split that was experienced by the art narrative of India. And it's interesting that that kind of a slippage happened. So I have deliberately put these two things together to show that there are these two aspects to understanding Dashrath. So if you come to the art aspect, he began art pretty early in the CN school in Ahmedabad, as I was saying, under the guidance of Ravi Shankar Raval and Rasiklal Parekh. Rasiklal Parekh was his direct teacher, and Ravi Shankar Raval, who was called the Kala Guru of Gujarat, he was very much hovering around and observing the progress of this young artist. And they were the ones who encouraged both the school and Dashrath's parents to let this boy do what he wanted, not to get bothered that he was not doing too well in academics. Dashrath was, within quotation, to use a gentle word, he was a mischievous person. He was childlike and he was mischievous. And he continued to remain mischievous throughout his career. He had the greatest lark he would have was in doing some prank, pulling some trick on somebody. And he could do that in various interesting ways. So he was constantly full of mischief in school. He was bunking school. He was taking his paper in colors and going to and sitting in this fantastic mosque and stepwell a few kilometers away from Ahmedabad called Sarkhej. He's taken me to that spot where he used to come and sit, bunk in class, and then sit and draw the whole day and do colors the whole day, and then go back home only in the evening and so on. So when Ravi Shankar Raval saw that this was the kind of passion he had, he persuaded the school as well as the parents not to get too hecked up by it and allow him to do what he wanted. And then he is the one again who suggested that go to a formal art school, choose your school. So somebody suggested, why not go to Shantiniketan? And Dashrath, and I don't know exactly who accompanied him, but at the age of 18, accompanied by somebody, he went to Shantiniketan and stayed there for a week, and then came back saying that I can't fit in there because everything is too dhila dhala. He kind of, I think, reacted against the sentimentalism or romanticism that Shantiniketan stood for at that time. Obviously, that's not true today, but there was a certain, sense of romance in the air there, and he sort of didn't respond to it. Then somebody suggested, okay, what about this amazing artist and teacher in Madras School of Art called Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary. So that's when he traveled to Chennai, and Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary apparently did not ask him, show me your paintings, did not ask him, okay, I'm giving you paper and pencil, draw something and show. He did not say, what do you like, what are your preferences? He was sitting at a table and he put out his panja like that and he said, Kushti karega? And Dashrath loved that, and both of them did this panja business. And of course, Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary defeated him, and with a great broad smile, he said, okay, you join the college. So this was Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary. He was a sportsman, he was a wrestler, he was a hunter, he loved his drink in the evening. And he was a kind of a very large person. And that's where Dashrath flourished. Then for the next 3 years, he sort of, actually 4 years, he learned there under Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary. And during that period, just as he finished that, I think around 1953, when he finished the College of Art course, he went back to Ahmedabad to the CN school, and he was so happy with this shift that he had made into art and formal art school and all that, that he wanted to do something for this school who had encouraged him to go towards art, and had not insisted that do science and engineering and medicine and so on. So in gratitude, he went and created over a few days a very beautiful sculpture outside the CN school. I'll show you the sculpture in a minute. And the sculpture is still there. And in fact, about roughly 3 or 4 years ago, when some of us had gone to the school to see that sculpture, it was in a bit of a dilapidated condition, and Pinky Godiawala suggested to the school management that, look, this is a historic sculpture made by one of your great students from this school. Why don't you restore it, and why don't you announce it in the press that we are restoring it and we are bringing. So that was done. And let me show you that sculpture. Can I share the screen? It says host disabled participants screen sharing. Siddharth, is it possible
You can
to share
it, Sadanand. Yeah, you can share it.
Can you say this? Can you say it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, now it's coming on.
Visible now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the sculpture that he made. He must have been all of 21, 22, something 21, 22, something like that, when he made this sculpture of these two girls who are holding hands and doing that particular game that's so common all over India. And the position of this pigtail. So I think it's, if you follow my cursor, it's this pigtail that was snapped a bit and it was restored. And a new pedestal was created like this. And it's now, there's a big plaque there in honor of Dashrath and so on and so forth. So right from then, one could see a certain, dynamism in his approach to how does one go back?
You need to stop screen sharing.
Stop screen sharing.
At the bottom, where you started screen sharing, the button you clicked, you just click that again.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, so and then from here he goes on to Paris to the École des Supérieurs of Beaux-Arts and does 2 years there, comes back to India, works in the Bhulabhai Desai Center. So these are all sort of experiences that he had in his career as an artist. I would like to then show you a little clip on his connect with ceramic. Miti, if you can do the second screen share, please, the video clip. He develops an interest in pottery and ceramics and then moves into that. Audio is not on, I think.
Country in Europe which I choose, and then I been to Czechoslovakia. And they thought of it, my fellowship is for doing painting, and I thought of it in Czechoslovakia, that region I will not do painting because they had all social realism painting on that time going on, but they're known for blowing us and beautiful ceramics. One of the best person in the ceramic world is Professor Eckert was there, and I asked him that could I, instead of painting, could I do this ceramic? I never had an idea to that I'll make a great pot, or I had no intention to make a good ceramic, but I was interested in a lot of accidents. So I used to walk from my place of staying to go to studio, walk and pick up bolts and nuts and everything on the roads and play around. And if I like it, then I take it and stuck into my ceramic. Man who was looking after my furnace, engineering, he always said, your furnace makes a lot of noise. And I know why he's making noise. Also, I knew that he's making noise because he didn't know that I put stone inside her. Sometimes it used to smell also a lot. Because sometimes I take the whole fish and put it inside and cover it with the glaze and fire it so the flash burning. But then what happened, the bone cancelled, and then you get the whole fish structure remain as it is. And you get a beautiful fish made out of that oven plate. So this risk you have to take it if you want it to be. Don't try to make great pieces. Let other people to decide whether they're good pieces or not. You just said, I'm going to celebrate it. I got an opportunity. I wanted to work on it.
Beautiful. Now you can release it. Then you put it space, that space. Then you have to create. Okay. Then you see the contour change. You see the contour change. Release it, don't tightly, otherwise it becomes like a plate. Yes. Beautiful. Now once you understand, please search for what you are going to do tomorrow.
You take this paper. It is very simple to do this. It says, I don't need a strength, but I cannot break it like that. You pull it in the same direction. See? And that, because this is not in compression and tension. That way it's easily there. But when it comes in tension, it becomes stronger. And then the structure is the minimum. Normally you have load-bearing structures. And everything is load on it, whatever weight. So it's a vertical and it's a load. The sensitivity is not load. It's not load weight. It's like a whole roof can float like that without touching to the ground. And if possible, you anchor it.
Dashrath is a person who has worked with three of the greatest architects of the 20th century. He's worked with Louis Kahn, he's worked with Buckminster Fuller, he's worked with Fry Otto. Dashrath has worked with them actively in projects, erecting structures with them. He's a great draftsman. He can draw buildings with great facility. This one is an exact model of the pavilion that was built in New Delhi in 1969 for the run the centenary exhibition, this World is My Family exhibition, which this model was used in full scale to cover an area of 16,900 square feet next to Rajghat. And under that was housed this incredible exhibition called The World is My Family.
Yeah, thank you, Miti. So basically in one clip, again, I want to show this, sorry, two other rather large disciplines that he got connected with, ceramics on the one hand and architecture and tensile structures on the other, both of which he worked very actively and created some very, very interesting things. And it's interesting for me living here in Chennai because whatever he produced in NID as a prototype, when the ceramic section opened and he had gone to Czechoslovakia and apprenticed with Professor Prayakert, and he had, like he says in the clip, he was interested only in accidents. He was learning through accidents. He was prepared to take risks. He was not learning in the formal canonical method. So he learned the tricks very fast. He learned the composition of glazes. He learned turning on the machine. And it's interesting for me that a person like him, you could go the whole range. You could sit at the potter's wheel in Vastrapur outside of Ahmedabad. Now, of course, it's within Ahmedabad. And on the floor wheel, and he could work with that. And till the end of his life, there were cut marks on the, just below the knee, because the wheel would cut the leg. Most village potters in India have that mark. He could do that. He could form the clay. He could fire it in different, with different material. For example, I have here with me at home. This is a Azamgarh pottery technique. Basically, it's a black clay which turns black, and in fact, because it's fired in cow dung cakes. And the smoke, it's a smoke that turns it black like this. And this kind of reduced Azamgarh. He left only this one line there. He didn't do any other decoration. He just left it like that. And there's a whole series of this kind of black pottery that he created for the pottery at Sevapuri, where he worked after he left NID. He moved to Sevapuri. Or he would do these kind of very, very high-end glazes. You can see his signature there. This is a prototype that he made for some what do you call, request at NID. And this kind of crystal glaze, you can see the crystallization of the glaze inside the thing. And similarly, these kind of very, very interesting. So all these prototypes would end up here and have in fact become a small little Dashrath Museum here itself. Lots of objects that he made. This probably is one of the first ceramic plates that he made. It's completely bare, and it's made with a very interesting mix of cloth and papier-mâché and clay. And if you notice here, that's one of the early signatures that Dashrath used to use, like a Chinese stamp or a Japanese stamp, because he made a stamp and he used to use that as signature. Now, these are all, so this is the kind of one end of the pottery. The other is this kind of thing that used to be made at NID. It's a stoneware pottery. This was made for the ITC hotels, the Chola hotels, Maurya hotels, etc. On an order to NID, these kind of plates, an entire set, an entire dinner set. So these are the kind of things he was doing on the one hand with ceramic, very, very high-end industrial pottery, the medium studio pottery, and the low-end work with the village potter's wheel, which he revived at Sevapuri in a very interesting way. And on the other hand, architecture of various kinds, from the Louis Kahn kind of brickwork to the Roy Otto kind of tensile structure. So it was interesting to see a man absorb all these multiple aspects of multiple disciplines and in one sense create an amalgam. There was no difference in his mind. And if you see the work, in fact, you'll see one running into the other. You'll see the ceramic, some of the ceramic plates that you saw maybe became his collages later on. Some of the collages you see are in fact coming from street photography that he learned after getting introduced to Cartier-Bresson and in Paris, and Cartier-Bresson encouraging him to pick up the camera and work. He began to see India in a very, very interestingly visual way. I'll show a little clip of that just for the flavor of it. Miti, can we go to the next clip, please? Miti Desai is a designer and dancer who's based in Bangalore at the moment, and she's helping me do this screen share thing.
In France, I didn't know who is the person who come into my exhibition with a small camera hanging in like a necklace, like a M3. And he was watching in the gallery and seeing after the exhibition. He told me that, do you take pictures? And I said, no, I don't take pictures. He said, why? I said, I hate it. In a very simple conversation, he said, do you mind taking pictures if I give you my camera? So I said, why do you want me to take pictures? He said, you see well. And I clicked twice and given a camera back. And after 15 days, he invited me to home. Would you like to come for a dinner? And he showed me so many prints of his work. And then suddenly I realized it was Henri Cartier-Bresson. When I've been first time away from my friends in 50s, and I wanted to share everything. So when I've been first time in France, and I start seeing it, and I want to tell them what I saw, and I was not able to write. So what to do? And then by force, I have got a simple camera, and everything I've seen, and that's only single purpose, that how to share.
I want those black and white very much now.
He was a student of painting and I was a student of dance. And it was almost like with friends, it was compulsory that everybody watched everything else. If he painted, I watched him paint and he watched me dance. So he has watched the rehearsals quite a lot and from very close way. So I would say that Dashrath understands movement. He has seen it from very, very close.
Dyed cloth placed on the riverbed of Sabarmati River in Ahmedabad for drying, and you have a series of aerial shots of that. You see the formation of a certain kind of blocking and a certain intensity of abstract visuality. The way he has photographed these circus graphics in the 50s.
I think the genius of this country is the way the people does small things without any acknowledgement is wonderful. Kind of mithai walas and kind of market walas, they put Like collages, no? They put silver foil, gold foil, palm wala, and all wonderful things. Only we don't look at them as an art. You go to.
Yeah, thank you, Miti. So these are the sort of, let's say, basic framework within which one would try to understand Dashrath. The fact that he came from a multidisciplinary perspective. He tried to marry many disciplines together, didn't keep them in exclusion or isolation. So the photographs that you saw and the way he has photographed the shops, the Indian shops, and the color palette of that comes into his ceramic, and from there it comes into his collage. And so it's a very interesting continuity of vision, continuity of eye. And it was quite usual for people to call him a visual genius because he had that kind of fantastic capacity to see in a particular manner. His entire verbal vocabulary probably was about 500 words, either in English or in Gujarati or in Hindi. He didn't go beyond that. But with that, actually, he could spin magic. Any project, when he was in NID, any project that the NID wanted the government of India to give, because NID was always short of funds. It was under the Ministry of Industries, and it was looked at as some fancy idea of Nehru, and where does a poor country need a design? Those kind of dismissive thoughts were there. So money wasn't easy for the institute in those early years, and whenever there was a possibility of a project, some New York trade fair happening, some Montreal trade fair happening, some Osaka trade fair happening, then NID tried to back that for itself. And the person who would be sent to persuade the bureaucracy that, and more particularly the finance ministry, that money should be given to NID for doing the project, was this person with absolute minimum capacity with words. But then he could spin magic with it. All of us used to be open mouthed with the kind of wonder when he spoke about what the possibilities of things, the possibility of life, very large expanded vision. And he liked working in scale. He liked working in very big scale. And I think there's a certain confidence that he had in his own capacity to create huge scale. And that first phase of NID between 1961 and 1971, 1971, a big change happens when Gautam and Gira Sarabhai move out and the new administration comes in, the government has bigger control, etc., etc. But that first phase was more an autonomous phase. And that was a phase in which Dashrath was probably the most creative and the most active within the NID framework. Siddharth talked about being corrected by Ashok Chatterjee, a good friend of mine, who was also director of NID between 75 and 85, being corrected by saying that Dashrath was not the first design director or whatever terminology. But this is the whole point. We don't know. The NID has failed the nation, I would say, very badly by not doing its own history. We don't know what happened in those 10 years exactly. Very little documentation is there. If at all there is documentation, nobody has done anything about it. So we don't know. The legend is that NID began at the Calico Mills compound, which was across the river from where NID is now, at the Calico Mills compound in one dilapidated room with one table, one chair, and one Dashrath Patel. This is the legend about the origins of NID. So what he was called, whether he was called founder, whether he was called founder director, whether he was founder secretary, whether he was this, whether he was a chaprasi, whether he was a peon, he did all those functions. We don't know. We don't know what they were called. When Kumar Vyas came in a little while later, when Haku Shah came in a little while, who were they? Were they professors? Were they instructors? Were they teachers? What were they called? We don't know. We don't know what exactly happened. We don't know how the process, which was in fact, in Gautam Sarabhai's mind, it was a Bauhaus process, learning by doing. That was the sort of process that was initiated in NID. Gautam Sarabhai, mathematician, was pulled out of his university at the age of 22, brought to Ahmedabad by his father Ambalal Sarabhai to enter the board of the Calico empire. And of course, he was interested in that, but his greater passion was doing these kind of things. And therefore, he and his younger sister, Veera Sarabhai, put all their energy into setting up the NID in Ahmedabad. Actually, after the Eames report, the government of India was prepared to start it in Bangalore, apparently. But it was Gautam and Veera Sarabhai who assured them that Ahmedabad has the industrial potential to support a project like this by industrialists and business people contributing both revenues as well as a certain requirement, a design requirement which will keep the institute running. So this is how NID starts. But we don't have a history. And successive directors of NID and NID, I mean, like I said, till 3 years ago when they did this 50 years of the ceramic, setting up the ceramic unit, history was a non-existent word in NID. Nobody recognized, if you had gone there, say even 10 years ago, and you ask people who are Gautam and Veera Sarabhai, they won't know. Who is Dashrath Patel? They will not know. There was no reference to these people just till a few years ago. Now, why is it so in a premier institute like India? I don't know, but that's the story. And so there is this phases in NID, and that first phase when Dashrath went out and did all these things, it was basically a certain self-confidence of not caring if you get rejected, because you know you can actually execute it even if you don't have the resources for it. So I will just show you one more clip so that you get to know this Kida in Dashrath's head. And I can only call it a bug, to work in scale, to work in huge, giant scale. So Miti, if you can please show the next clip, which is a very short clip. And after that, I think it'll be time to wind up because we don't have too much time. No, not this, Miti. Miti, not this.
Which one, Sadanand?
2105, from 2105.
Okay.
I learned one thing by that I like this skill. I like, if somebody said, can you do it in 10 kilometers celebration? I said, yes, I'll do it, rather than a one Madan. And that's what I did all my first. And that skill is interesting because that skill itself is such a staggering thing. Yeah, I love to go haywire in a scale. That's why I did the whole, from Kremlin to take it to Lalin Stadium. Because I said, if I sit in the Lalin Stadium and do my festival, the Russians are doing for 75 years and they're master of it, how to beat them in the game. So start from Kremlin and come 12 kilometers, which they never done it before, and they need how to manage it also. And then you take abandoned, and if you take our people are great. But if you leave them, let loose them in a Maidan, they can occupy the whole Maidan without any fear, like Ram Leela. And you know, thousands of people walk in. And you see the 26th January parade. They don't know, they're yawning and they don't know why they're walking. And they go out of focus. They can't coordinate the music and the band and the crowd. But then you take them, put them in Kumbh. They fill up the whole river. Ganga looks like a little stretch, you know. So the great ability of our people is that if you don't control it, and if you leave them, let loose them, they have a fantastic ability to create visual impacts. And I learned very easily. So I didn't have a burden of being creative. I had to just bring people together and let them loose. And then they create an abundance of energy, power, and everything they have.
Yeah, so basically this is the, in one sense, this is Dashrath Patel politics. Don't control, let loose people. And unfortunately, in our context today, the opposite is happening. People don't have a chance for being let loose anymore. Everything is containment and everything is control and everything is surveillance. And so it's basically the political perspective of a child. Don't control, don't tell me do this, do that, don't make a puppet out of me, just let me be free and let me enjoy. And this has been the principle of Dashrath all the time. And in that pleasure that he experienced himself, he created things. And then because of that, the things that he created also transmitted pleasure and also transmitted a certain sense of play and a certain sense of game. Now, I have here with me a device which those of you who are in South India might recognize. It's called a Palanguri. It's a game with all these holes. They contain cowrie shells. And you play this. It's a long game that can go on between people for a long time. And often it's played on Shivratri night and all that. It's a fascinating game with lots of, twists and turns in the game. And Chandra once requested him that normally the Palanguri board is a metal board. It's made of brass, very beautiful and all that, but very heavy. You can't travel with it. And Chandra had got quite fixated on this game. So she said, is it possible that you can make for me a Palanguri board that I can travel with? So hey presto, he came back in a couple of months from Ahmedabad, making this rosewood Palanguri with wheels. You can tie a thread here and pull it and take it. It's like a little cart. So he was full of this. He was full of this sort of mischief and game and so on. And before I close, I also want to show his daily activity. There was no day in his life when Dashrath was not drawing like this. I'm holding out a book which contains his drawings. And any page you turn, is just drawing in all sorts of ways. There are about 100 pages here. And there are all sorts of forms. And every moment of the day, if we were having, for example, if he was sitting in on this particular session, he would already have drawn maybe 30, 40 drawings of this kind. It was kind of effortless for him. And even on the day he passed away, he passed away on December 1, 2010 in the morning at around 10:30 or so. And even that morning, he had got up, he had his bath, and he had done 7 or 8 drawings. And then he had a breakfast, and then peacefully he went. But these were the kind of drawings that he did at the end, bamboo and ink pen drawings. And it was his constant touch with creativity. I used to say it was like a musician who catches his shruti, and every day he connected with that. There was no upper shruti in it. He actually caught the shruti, and then he could enter any kind of conversation about creating and being in the world. So this is a quick sort of encapsulation of Dashrath. Now, I don't know how much time I've taken, but if there are questions, I'm willing to enter into that. And thank you very much. Thank you, Miti, for the...
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we open it for discussion with the rest of the participants, I'd like to, I suddenly recollect when you mentioned about he designed the festival in Russia in 1987. I remember Pupul Jaikar had asked me to make a collection of handicraft of 9 states of Eastern India. that is Orissa, Bengal, Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, etc. So my collection of handicraft went there. So one thing when I'm talking, as I mentioned that I was young in JJ School of Art in Bombay, and when I was the youngest in the Bulaba Institute, when Gaitonde and Dashrath Patel had the first floor studio. And I remember he used to speak a few words of English and Gujarati and Hindi mixed up. He never completed a sentence fully like that. But you understood what he was saying. This is one. The other thing I remember, he always raised his head high and his protruding eyes. This is another. Number three that I see a structure. Any one of us in the country or anywhere in the world, those who come from a traditional rural background, those who have seen the sea, the river, the hills, the trees and the mountain, and then done something in any field of art, they have a multifaceted experience, expertise. Like when you were talking, showing the shoes, the vegetable, the onion, this, that, like Hakusha, although was a contemporary artist. Like I'm setting up this art center in Bhubaneswar, but I have a collection of handicrafts. So there are many of us who come from rural background, so that Dashrath was a very special person, and he was very lucky, I feel, at a particular time, juncture, where Gujarat and Ahmedabad, Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Kahn, and all these people, and then Giraben sending him to many important institutions all over the world. So it was a fantastic amalgamation, and when Dashrath had the experience, and this wonderful man, and he should be an example for many institutions of art. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadanand. That was a really exciting kind of a journey, because I studied in NID about 25 years ago, and Dashrath Patel was a larger than life figure, and naturally it was a time of flux at NID. But even then, it was like one heard stories, and when your exhibition happened about 10 years or 15 years later, it was something very exciting for us. So, but we never knew exactly what it was about. Like you said, archiving history at NID was rather poor. And so I think for a lot of us who went to the college, this was, I think, your entire lecture today, it's been a kind of a journey of discovery for us, and it's been very exciting for people like me. But we would love to have, if there are any questions that anyone would have for you, and the floor is open to anyone. And in case you think of something also that you would like to share, please go ahead. But anyone, you can just unmute yourself and you can ask. Okay. The first question is always the one that takes longer time.
Yeah, hello. Hello.
Hi, Padmini. Hi, Padmini. Good
Hi,
seeing you.
how are you?
Please switch on your camera too, so that we can see and Sadanand can see you.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Hi, how are you, Sadanand?
Wonderful seeing you. Great.
And it was so nice hearing you today after so long, seeing you also on the screen. It was really nice. I mean, I remember him so well. I was his first student when he started exhibition design, and I shifted from textiles to learn it from him. And it was for 1.5 years, I was the only student he had. So I had very good, proximity every day. He was talking. And what always struck me was, even at that time, he was talking about projecting. I mean, why should we do the kind of slideshow on a screen of an auditorium? We should do it in the sky. And that's how he kind of inspired. And he also, people first thought like it is all, how can it be done? He's just dreaming and, but he really did it. He did that kind of things. So he had that kind of vision and also capacity to make it happen, those kind of things. So he put both of them together, which made him unique. And I was also very happy to go and see his collection at Alibag, the whole collection. Then I also got to see it in Calcutta 2 years ago. There was an exhibition of his work again, you know. So I have a lot of photographs of his works. So it is wonderful to see, I mean, today's program.
Yeah, I just want to add, Padmini, that the exhibits that are there at the Alibag Museum are actually the exhibits that were shown at the retrospective in Bombay in 1999.
Right.
So when we showed his works in NGMA Delhi first in 98,
right.
That particular retrospective had almost 430 odd objects, if you want to call it that, paintings and ceramic and various things like that. There were 430 odd. But when we brought it to Bombay the next year, the Bombay NGMA didn't have that much space. So it had got reduced to about 310 or so. So those 310 works are what some of them, most of them are what went to Alibag finally. But a huge amount of his drawings and his object prototypes, his photographic negatives, his slides, they're all there still in Ahmedabad in his flyer, which is being looked after by his sister Snehata. And quite a bit of them are here in Chennai too. All his dance photographs and a large body of his drawings, etc., all here in Chennai also. So cumulatively, it would work out to something like, I think, 80,000-90,000 photographs and probably about 40,000-50,000 drawings, which have only been exhibited sparsely here and there. But technically, that's the kind of material that's available in Ahmedabad and Chennai. And we have, after he passed away, we discovered under his bed a huge box containing all his paintings and drawings, particularly oil paintings and watercolors, which he had done as a student between 1948 and 1958. So the work he did in CN School, the work he did in College of Art in Madras, the work he did in École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and then when he came back to Bulabai Desai, so all these works, oil paintings and watercolors, sheets of them, almost 230 of them, in a box under his bed, which he had put away and completely, forgotten its existence. And when we pulled it out, it was all, they were damaged, there was fungus, that some had been insect eaten and so on. So we sent it to this conservator and restorer in Delhi called Sanjay Dhar, who did a very, very good job of restoring all that. And then subsequently, we've been having small exhibitions every year for his anniversary day, December 1 in Ahmedabad, and sometimes later in Chennai. We do this small 50 works at a time. We do smaller exhibitions. But now looking back at those paintings, oil colors and watercolors, which you might have seen in the little video clips I showed,
right.
You get to understand, since all of them are together, most artists, what happens, I don't know whether it's true for Jatin, but what happens for most artists is from early age when you're exhibiting and selling, many works go away. You very little remains with you. What remains with you is the recent work. The older work somehow vanishes. But here, when you see the student level work that Dashrath did, we get a very good entry into the way art was taught in Indian art schools, like College of Art Madras. What did they tell you? They said copy. Copy a Cézanne, copy a Monet, copy a Picasso, copy. And the copying was happening from books, because there were no originals here. There were prints and there were books. So what looked like, like Dashrath himself says, what looked like very thick paint applied. So he used lavishly with knife, thick paint. Actually, it was all brushwork. But only when you go and see the real work, you understand it. So that way of learning. So what I'm trying to say is, all these art students go through a phase. They go through a Cézanne phase. They go through a Raphael phase. They go through a Monet phase. They go through a Picasso phase. They go through various, when they're copying feverishly, copying, fervently and trying to capture that particular technique or that particular method. And for me, when we exhibited Dashrath's, all his paintings together, his oil colors and his watercolors, this is what came out foremost. Of course, the skill of the artist, of course, the fantastic range the person has, but also it was a very, very good archival expose into how art was taught in Indian schools. And that became like a very, very interesting entry point into seeing his work all over again after he passed away.
Yeah, that is a lot of, actually he has a very good this thing. And I would, Sadanand, I'll be back in Coimbatore after 3 months. And I would love to come and see your collection sometime.
Oh, please come, please come. You're very close by.
Chennai is not very far.
Yeah,
thank you. Are there anyone else who would like to ask any questions from Sadanand Menon?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Hi, I am Ranjit. I used to be I used to study in NID and I am an alumni. And my question is specifically about experiments in arts and technology, this era which was very prominent between late 60s and early 70s. And basically I had taught a course on systems thinking in 2018. And during the course, we had included the content from EAT. And we had discovered a lot of hardware coming from that era, which was found to be like a lost treasure when we reconnected the original EAT members. So this 30th July, we are going to have a series of sessions, which is rediscovering the archive and heritage that the EAT left behind in India, in NID, and also the work of artists such as John Cage and David Tudor and a few other people in Ahmedabad at that time. So we will be joined by actually the Julie Martin, who used to be also, who is the head of EAT right now, and has been also in NID during that phase. So it's just very difficult to find information of that era in general. So I was just hoping if somebody actually spent time during that time, if I could get some details of their contacts or something.
Yeah, Ranjit, I can point you to somebody called Alexander Cafe, Kefee, Alexander Cafe, who is a professor now somewhere in the UCLA, I think. But he was in India roughly 7 years ago, precisely doing this, exploring the EAT moment in 1969, 70, 71. Actually, 70, 71 is the more intense moment. And that was a time when Billy Clover and his partner Julie Martin, whom you're talking about, came to NID. And also following them came, now Billy Clover and Julie Martin were scientists. They were mathematicians and scientists. One was a physicist and one was a mathematician. But they were interested in this connection between art and technology. That's why they called it EAT, Experiments in Art and Technology. And here at my place, I have many, let's say, mementos of that period. Many things were created by people who came, which included the artist, multimedia artist Robert Rauschenberg. Of course, John Cage was the first to bring the Moog synthesizer to India, along with David Tudor. They created all sorts of audioscapes. And 2 experiments that he did that I remember, which I remember vividly. One was recording the laughter. John Cage recorded the laughter of Chandralekha. Those who have heard Chandra laugh, it's a very special experience. She had this infectious kind of giggle. And once she started giggling, it was like very difficult for people to have a straight face. So John Cage recorded the giggle and he created what's called a happening on the lawns of NID with using 10 speakers. So 10, what are they called? Speakers. So as people came in at the given time, 5 o'clock in the evening or whatever, for tea, they were invited. From one corner of the compound, a giggle began. And then very soon it was relayed to the next speaker and the next speaker and the next speaker. And Very soon, the entire assembly of over 200 people was all laughing uncontrollably. So this was one experiment in sound that John Cage did. The other was recording a classical musician, I think Amir Khan, if I'm not mistaken, and then putting it into re-recording. So by the time that Amir Khan was, as say, I am concerned, for example, he's one of the greatest Indian classical musicians ever, and it's like a he is somebody who takes you to some kind of a spiritual space. He recorded Amir Khan's music 200 times. You record it once, then you re-record the recording, then you re-record the re-recorded one, etc., etc. By the time it reaches 200 re-recordings, that music becomes like a harsh sound. So he tried to prove that the distance between acceptable, aesthetic, sweet, beautiful music and it's whatever its opposite might be, which could be noise or harshness or whatever, is very short. They're in fact same, both are in fact one and the same thing. You cannot have aesthetic music without having harshness also implicated in it. And this is what, of course, eventually he also proved with that beautiful 4.33 segment, of total silence, silence as music, and so on and so forth, with the Philharmonic Orchestra actually not doing anything, which is a historic piece of recording. So I think Alexander Kefi can put you, because he went through all the archives. He went through the archives of Rauschenberg, of John Cage, of all the Andy Warhol, and all these people who are part of EAT, and he has pulled out a lot of interesting material. So probably, Ranjit, probably you can try and access that. I think you can Google him and you'll get it.
Yeah, thanks. I had actually met Alex. I am in touch with Alexander Keefe. Okay, Julie Martin is actually creating an anthology right now of EAT's activities in India. And what the situation is that there was a lot of hardware that we discovered in the warehouse, in the old warehouse during my course. And then this particular hardware was specifically made by Bell Labs for EAT, and it had been just lying there for over 2 decades or something like that. And unfortunately, I think the entire hardware last year, in order to convert that warehouse into some other department, I think they just probably ended up in the garbage, which is kind of tragic. So we were really trying to rediscover the hardware in order to document it for this anthology. So if anybody knows where the hardware is, would be like it would be very critical to see where it is right now.
Sorry to interrupt.
So probably Ranjit, you could take it up with Sadanand offline. And I think because we are out of time, there's a comment that Dadi Padamji, who also studied NID, has written. I don't know, Dadi, are you there? Dadi?
I'm there. Yes, I am there.
Hi. Do you want to?
Hi, Dadi. How are you, Dadi?
Hi.
Do you want to say, Dadi, what you've said in the chat?
No, I'm saying that it's quite interesting because there was this very structured stuff that we came into at NID, the Armin Hoffman, black and white and straight lines and things. And Dashrath came from a different background. He came from the art background, from the creative. And that's what your dad also said about this freedom of the experiment. And I remember the first time, there was a summer semester, I think it was called, where everybody could do different things. Now it's called something else. And we did an engraving workshop on metal plates. And it was the first time that we were working with free form, with splattering things on the thing to engrave and all. And it was quite fantastic because it broke away from this. Also, I remember lines. If it was a curly whirly line, graphics, oh no, this is, Baroda, you cannot do, this has to be all straight and, things like that. So these were all the things. Fashion, for instance, was a bad word at that point at NID. It was all about utility and uniforms and things like that. Yet, I remember in the 3 eves that happened there, textile people had done a very interesting event, fashion design. One dress that I very clearly remember was made, I think Gitto and people, and it was made from, you know, the Chopot, the red book, which is which you write your accounts on, the red cover. And she had taken that whole thing as a square and made a dress. Dashrath had done a waterfall in one of the square little openings in the ground floor, waterfall, where the canteen used to be, and he tried to do projection on it. I remember these 2 or 3 things. We did a blacklight production. I can't remember the other stuff that happened there, but yeah, it was a different time.
Lovely,
Thank
lovely.
you. Thank you, Dan. And I think we are now clearly out of time. So we're going to wrap up. And I think, and I hope that you can always write to Sadanand Menon directly or to us. I don't know, Sadanand, would you be okay getting questions and things?
I'll be okay, Siddharth, but before we wrap up, give me just 1 minute.
Of course, please.
I just want to end with another nice image. Miti, can you, in those list of visuals, can you go to that Gandhi statue, please? There's a very famous Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary Gandhi statue on the Marina Beach in Madras. It's the Dandi March kind of thing. Many of you would have seen it. The last one in this, Miti, yeah. So many of you have seen this, and Miti, can you point the cursor to if you see the front foot of Gandhi, I think it's the left foot forward here. The toe is slightly raised. If you notice the way it's a bronze sculpture made in 1958 and installed in 1959, inaugurated in fact by Jawaharlal Nehru and all that. But how interestingly that toe, the slightly lifted toe, creates the impression of movement. Just imagine if the foot had been absolutely flat, what it would have seemed like, and how the movement comes up when the toe is raised just a little bit. This is one of the most lively sculptures of Gandhi. There are Gandhi statues galore all over the country. But this is a sculpture done by one of India's greatest sculptors. And what Roy Chaudhary did here, particularly that foot, was a product of several, variations that were tried out by him and his senior students. And one of those students at that time who came from Bombay to work with him on this was Dashrath. And here in our house here, we still have, Miti, can you go off screen? We still have these maquettes made by Dashrath. This is the maquette of the foot, Gandhi's foot. And you will see that little detail here where the, Miti, come back, please, come back. Show me that photograph of the leather material in Sevapuri.
Okay.
So this little, plaster of Paris maquette is something that, and you will, if you notice, you will, if I can, I don't know if you can say this, but the chappal that Gandhi is wearing, it's a very famous chappal, and you can see the module of that here in this image in front of you. The 3 leather objects is a bag, there's a shoe, and in the middle there is a chappal. Those are precisely the chappals that Gandhi began stitching when he was in jail in South Africa, and later on continued to do in India. And he would make chappals with his own hands and present it to. And here Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary has very interestingly used that same design chappal here on the maquette also, meaning he instructed Dashrath to do that, obviously. And later on, Dashrath produced these chappals at the Sevapuri design school. So the continuity is quite fascinating. And the reason why this chappal is considered to be very special, the way Gandhi designed it, Gandhi was no designer within quotation, even though he designed so many, including an entire anti-colonial revolution in design, but he's not called a designer. But the great thing about this chappal is that it doesn't flap on the back of your feet when you walk. It hugs the heel, as Dashrath used to say. It hugs the heel, so it doesn't splash dirt or mud onto your feet or onto your pajamas or whatever. So these were the things that Dashrath worked on throughout his life, and kept connecting with all his teachers, kept connecting with all the people who, gave him his initial inspiration. So thank you very much for this, Siddharth, Nandita, and Jatin. It's a very beautiful thing you created for me. I see Varsha is also there. Hi, Varsha. Great to see you also. And
Debbie is also there. Debbie Scholar.
Sorry?
Debbie.
Debbie, yeah. Hi,
the
Debbie.
Courtauld Institute.
Yeah, I believe Debbie is the next speaker in this. So wonderful. Great to have all of you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sadanand. Thank you for doing this. And we just want to say that, both of you have said, Dr. Deborah Swallow, the director of Courtauld Institute of Art, London, will be our next speaker. She'll be the 247th speaker on the 14th of August. I think the numbers are also quite interesting, because 247 and it's 14th August, just before Independence Day. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you all can join in on the 14th of August to listen to her. And thank you again, Sadanand. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.